Oh, hey, shiny crafty people, Tim Totten here, and welcome back to the channel. Today, I want to show you another store-bought quilt hack. This quilt I bought at Walmart for $29.99. I've already turned it into a placemat, into cover for a toaster, and today we're making a portable casserole carrier. And in fact, at the end, I'll show you that this is actually reversible. How exciting. So why don't you join me over here again after I lay everything out at the cutting table to see what we need to make this fun project. So you're going to see how much of that store-bought quilt we still have left. We've only cut out a placemat and a couple of toaster covers, so I have so much left over. Let's go over here and I'll show you what you'll need for this project itself. So I'm definitely going to need some kind of a casserole dish or something that I want to use as my base. I'm going to use this 13 by 9 baking dish that I bought for covered baking pan that I bought for $5 at Dollar General. I'm also going to use some dowels that I also got at Dollar General. These were a couple dollars, and I'm going to use the two bigger ones that are down here at the end. I'm going to need some type of a pattern, and I'll show you how to draft this out in just a moment. A pen to mark on it with, obviously. Some clips, something to hold together. I'm going to need something to turn points with. This is a point turner I use called That Purple Thing. Something to cut with scissors. Rotary cutter. I'm also going to show you how to use the binding on this quilt. So we need a seam ripper, and I'm going to use a really pretty one that someone gave me. I'll tell you about that later. And then, of course, an iron. Now, I have two irons I love, this little Home Ever iron and my Sunbeam gigantic iron. I'm going to use this one because we're going to be doing larger pieces. And then finally, I'm going to use a cloth measuring tape so that I can measure out how big I'm going to make it for my pan. So let's get started with that. Now, I'm specifically using these dowels that I bought in the craft section at Dollar General because if you look at the pan, they're almost the width of this pan, and they're going to fit really well into the handle portion that I'm going to create for that. And so I'll use these really as my main measurement of how wide to make the handles that'll come up. So there's one piece of fabric is going to come around to the center, and then another piece wraps this way and goes over to fold over. So this particular one is the measurement for the handles that'll go this way. And this one is the length that goes around and flips over. To get these measurements then, I'm going to need to use my tape. And I'm just going to go ahead and find out how big around this would need to be. Sort of like I'm measuring the waist of this thing. And looks like this is about 32 inches around. Now, obviously, I would want it to cross over itself by a couple of inches. And so maybe I would want it to go sort of 4 inches overlap, right? If you did in the center here, a 4-inch overlap, or maybe even more to give it. So I would probably add 5 inches to it. So this needs to be at least 37 inches this way. Now, if I add seam allowance to that, if I was going to make seam allowance, I would add to that, but really I only need the, like I said, 37. And then we're going to use binding all around the out. So this will be 37 inches. Then I need to figure out how wide it needs to be. And I don't want it to be any wider than this pan because I don't want it to have to fold on the edges. So I would measure the width of the pan. And I would say that's about 9.5 inches. I don't want to go too much wider than that. So I could probably do it actually at 9 inches. So this is going to be 9 inches. All right, so that gives me 37 by 9. Then measuring this way, I need to figure out how wide it's going to be. And a lot of that's going to come off of these dowels. And these dowels are actually 12-inch dowels. Now this one is going to be doubled. The fabric will be two layers of fabric. And so I will need seam allowances. And I need at least a 1/2 inch for my 1/4 inch seam allowances. I might do a little more than that. I might do 3/4 of an inch or even an inch if I want thicker seam allowance. So these dowels are going to go in between these two openings, and it'll get stopped by the stitching on either side and go between. So it has to be at least 12 inches between this area. Probably more, like I said, because we need to make sure that it's going to be wider than that. So I'm going to make this a, let's say, 13. Let's see how it would go on the actual piece. See, on here I can get up to 14. So let me say I'm going to do a 13.5 inch that way. right? That's going to be the width across here. Now we'll need to figure out how wide I want this entire thing to be, and that's how far it's going to travel this way so that I have handles to lift it up. So I can decide, what do I feel most comfortable lifting it in that direction, and then it would flop closed. I think I'll want to do it the same width it would be, let's say that 32 inches. That would give us here, if we were lifting it up, I think that's probably a decent way. So if I make this 32 inches, and about an inch will get cut off in the sewing process, 31 will be the height of that. I think that's pretty good. So I'm going to say that this is going to be 31 inches across. All right, and the last thing I'll do is figure out how much fabric do I want on either side of these. Like, how big do I need my handle to be? And if I sort of measure my own hand, if I look here and say I need at least 4 inches in there for my hand, that'd be nice. That would give us sort of 4 inches on either side. You could go a little bigger if you wanted 5 inches. I think I'll do it at 4. And here's the secret. If I cut this exactly 4 inches, then you're going to lose a ½ inch on either side, which makes it 5. So I'm going to actually make this 3.5 inches right across here. So if our measurements for what I'm doing are going to be 13.5 inches wide with a 3.5 inch cutout in the middle at each end, and then 31 inches the full lengthwise. This will be cut 2 pieces of fabric that'll sew back to back, give us extra thickness, and then this will be a single piece. And here I'm going to show you a really cool trick for how to use the binding of the quilt to continue around. So let's go to the quilt and get that part going. I want to utilize the binding that's already on this to make the binding on my that piece that wraps around the length of this right here. And the nice part is I have all this extra binding that runs down. So what I'll do is I'll cut my piece of material out, but not clip the binding yet. So I'll make my marks for how long it needs to be. Then I'm going to use a seam ripper to take off the binding all the way down around, and then I'll just stitch that binding back on, and half of it will already have the binding placed on it. So the way I'm going to do that is I need my 31 inches, and I think I'm going to use, I'll definitely use a marker for this, but I want to use one a little bit lighter. I like a silver Sharpie, actually. And I will come in and measure my amount. I'm going to use that cloth tape that I had. Here's the cloth tape. And I know from my measurements that I need this entire thing to be 37 inches long. So we're cutting this piece here. So I'm going to use my measurement from the end and go down to 37 inches here at the bottom. And I'll put a real light mark on it. Right? Fantastic. And I'll do the same thing. Now I know I need it also to be 9 inches wide. So I'll measure over 9 inches. Now these marks are not going to be seen later because we're going to cover over the mark with the binding. So I'm just putting those marks along there as we go along. And then I will use my, get this out of the way. I'll use my rotary cutter along that distance and measure along 9 inches. Now I'm not going to cut all the way to the end down here because I want to keep using this piece of the binding. I'm going to cut really close, but leaving it open, leaving it on there. And again, my rotary cutter, I just changed this blade not that long ago either. And then the same thing here. I'm going to come in here and cut not all the way to the binding. And then the last thing I want to do is mimic this shape down here that rounded shape here as well. So I want to get you in close so you can see what I'm going to do with this. So here at this point, I want to start taking off the binding here, and I'm just going to use my seam ripper. This is a really nice seam ripper that a dear friend of mine named Kim, who was my first part-time employee, married to the fire chief in my town, and that's how I knew her, because I worked at the fire department. Her and her husband, Rex, who passed away last year. Is it last year or the year before? Oh my goodness, it's been a little over a year since he passed away. Awesome guy, really amazing, awesome, unbelievable friend. Lifelong firefighter, really good guy. They gave me this probably 10 years ago, this seam ripper. It was a hand turned out of wood, and it's got 2 different size seam rippers at each end. And I have held it for so long because it's just very near and dear to me. And it's pretty. So I'm gonna go through and take all the stitching out, and I need to go pretty far down. In fact, I'm gonna need enough to turn the corner here and go all the way back up. And so that's gonna be at least 46 more inches that I would need. But I have plenty, and I'll show you what I mean. I have plenty down the way that I can do. Now there's 2 ways for you to seam rip this. I'm putting my seam, my point of my seam ripper underneath each thread there and pulling up. Now this is a little bit tedious, but these are nice, they're long stitches on this. In fact, let me zoom you in, I want you to see it. There are really long stitches on this particular quilt, so it's really easy to get your point in there and pull it out, right? You could go underneath, you could do this part. You could, let me give you the right. You could go in underneath and then rip out. But my problem with that is I don't want to rip any of the fabric either. I want to keep it together. So for this one, I'm a fan of just getting your piece under there and going. Now you could cut farther down, like watch this. I'm going to go about 8 or 10 stitches down, cut that, and then pull that out. You see what happened? It just released all of that. I'll do it again, I'll show you. So this is already released here at this bottom, see? That's open. And I go down about 8 or 10 stitches, get my point underneath it, cut that, and then I could go in and sort of grab that thread if I had a long enough piece and pull it out. I'll pull a couple of these out so you can see what I mean. Get that piece released there and then pull it out. See, it pulled that thread completely out of there and now it's open. That's certainly one way to do it. I don't really mind picking it because I can go pretty fast. You'll see here I can flip through, and sometimes you can go like skip 2 ahead and really pull, but then it's just a little bit more work. So if you just pick, you actually get pretty quick at it. You're not trying to shove all the way through. You're just trying to get your little piece under. And in that case, you could use a pin even for this, but I'll tell you why I like a seam ripper instead, because it's not a real super sharp point here, and a pin wants to go into the fabric. This doesn't. Now you could, like I said, cut and rip, and then you'd have to pull all these little threads out, and that gets to be too much. Your other option is to pull this thread and gather it along. You could if you wanted. See how I'm gathering this? And you could gather up a pile of it. I don't like this as much because if the thread breaks, you're kind of back to square one. Although this is the way they do put gathers and other stuff in. I mean, look, we've just created this nice gather on that. I could keep this going all the way down, but then like that just happened, the fabric, the thread might rip. But if I went further past it and found one of the points and snapped it with my seam ripper right here, let me get one. Then I could go ahead and continue pulling this thread out, right? Pull the thread out like that. And now I've all from here to here just got opened up. Look how quickly that was done from here to here. So I'm going to do at least 46 more inches of that, and then we'll go on to the next step. So now you'll see I've disconnected down here and left a tail of that binding. And then I'm gonna come down here. I've now cut off 46 more inches. So I can just go ahead and cut this corner, finish that corner off. Now the last thing I need to do is make sure that I round all 4 of my corners, and I want them to be rounded much like this one up here. So I'm just actually gonna bring this one down here, and I'm going to mark on it without hopefully touching the other fabric where I want that corner to go. So I kind of have marked that a little bit. Perfect. And I can just, either with a rotary cutter or a pair of scissors, sort of cut that corner, and then I can just bring that along to the other sides. I'll turn it around this way, make sure my binding stays out of the way so I don't cut it, and I'm gonna copy that kind of a cut. And I'll do the same thing at this end. Here I'll mark it again with the pen. I don't want to just get that little bit of tail out of the way. Hold that out of the direction. And now what I'm going to do is stitch this binding back on all the way around, and see I've got plenty there, and that gives us the basis for our the inner flap of our casserole carrier. All right, let's cut out the other 2 pieces now. Because I'm making this this portion out of material that doesn't need to have any binding around the outside, it's gonna be 2 pieces of fabric back to back, I can pick wherever I want. And one I'm gonna turn so that I see this nice, pretty background color, and the other is gonna use the front color. So in fact, what I should do is find the pattern I want to be seen on the outside. And remember, it's going to be going this direction around the piece. So I might want that to be right out of this particular part or here. And so I actually like the idea of, since it's going to be 31 inches long, I like the idea of maybe starting and ending on something like this. So let me see where that 31 inches is going to be, and I just have to find the fabric measuring tape. So I'm going to take that fabric measuring tape. I know it needs to be this long. That's 31.5 inches. So I can just lay it out and see, where does that look good? And in fact, I think it might look good to come right through, ending at one of these and at one at the other. So that's where I want my 31 inches to be, 31.5. And let me zoom you out so you can see the full length of that. That's a better angle. And then I have to decide, how wide does it need to be? It needs to be 13.5 inches wide. So that's going to go, see, it needs to be 13.5 inches wide here. And that's going to be in this particular area. So that's good. I think I have a good mark for where that's going to be. So I will use my pen. Now you could have cut this out of, a piece of cardboard and then measured it. Now, if I didn't care where the pattern was, I could just go to the edge here and get my 13.5 inches and then go again to the other side. But I really want it to stay even. In fact, I think I'll cut it from over here. And here's the reason why that is. That's going to give me about 13.5 from the center here over. So kind of put the, figure out where that's centered and put my 13.5 inch mark. And 13.5, and keep doing that, making sure I continue those down. And I'll go this way a little bit, see if I can't keep it even. 13.5. So I'm going to draw those in with this Sharpie. Now I can see them. I don't know how well you'll be able to see them. The marks. I may need to get the black Sharpie back out. Let me do that. found it. Yeah, that'll be a lot easier for you to see. Let me keep those going down there. Now remember, it's going to go almost all the way down this way to each end, so I'm going to keep that mark going. We'll do on the other side as well. Now this is easier if you're not using a pattern that has a quilt that has such a defined pattern. Something more all over actually is probably easier to work with. I just really like this one. I am going to switch to a new one soon, and I'll tell you what that'll look like later. I'm just going to keep this going. Make sure it stays at 13.5 the whole way, at least far enough. Yeah, that looks great. Perfect. So it's enough distance there that I can now measure the rest of my measurement. And since I know this is at least more than that 37 inches that I need, I'm sorry, 31 inches that I need. Remember, my 31 comes to about here to here. I can come in now and I'm looking at the repeat on the pattern so that it's going to line up when it's done. That's now in place between the 31 comes down to this little blue mark. And on the other end, it also comes down to the little blue mark. So I'll put my cutter across, make sure it's square. I'm squaring it up. Cut that out there. Make sure my measurement still is accurate. Put my piece on at 31 inches. I can lift this out now. All right, and then I'm going to cut the other lines. Now, one of the nice things that I really like about this is that I'm using as much of this blanket this quilt as possible. This quilt literally cost me $30, and now I'm getting my third project out of it, which is a lot of fun. Now I'm cutting the other side there, and I'm going to leave this part intact because I don't need to worry about taking that off. I might need a long strip in the future. I'll just come up the side. Ooh. And I'll just trim here, make sure these pieces and parts come out. Ooh. A couple more. And there we go, that piece is finished. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this over to another part of the quilt and just go ahead and cut the other strip out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it over. Well, I thought I might need that, and I'm not actually going to be able to use that, so I'll just chop it off the rest of the way. There we go. Now when I line this up, I can then get the rest of this part out. Look at all the quilt I have left over. Now I'm not getting rid of any of these pieces. So the leftovers I'm holding on to, because who knows, I might make some mug rugs out of them. I had to have someone explain to me exactly what a mug rug was, and it's basically like a little coaster for a mug, which is very cute. So I definitely will make some of those. That'll be a little later on. And I could measure this all out again, but I'm just going to use the other one as my tester, you know, my template. And again, make sure you've gone all the way through. Not sure why this one is just not. I think it's a mixture of my cutting table and my cutter. This cutting table is not brand new. We've been in heavy rotation at our business for quite some time, so that could be the explanation. All right. Last thing I'll do is probably just trim a little more off the edge here because it's a little too tight. It's over. It's not exactly accurate, and that's going to cause a problem. I want it to be exactly the same. So I got to trim that up accurately. Oh, that came off a little bit, but it'll be fine. All right, the next thing we have to do is we have to put in those cuts on the edges here. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to put these right sides together. Well, I need to put it the way it's going to be sewn, which is like this. Because remember, I want this to be one color on the inside, one color on the outside, so it becomes a reversible casserole carrier. And I've got to cut that center piece in. So I'm going to go ahead and mark the center, because that'll get cut out anyway. So 13.5 inches. So half of 13 would be 6.5. So 6 3/4 should be the center. So I will find that here and mark 6 3/4. That'll be our center. And then I'm going to use a cute little square that I have now lost. Oh, I had it here somewhere to use to show you. Wow, I have flipped up everything and it's gone. It's one of these cute little... Let me find it, because that's part of my strategy. Yes, I found it. Okay, so this is the little square that I'm going to use. And this one is 4.5 inches. So basically there's an extra ½ inch over here where my thumb is. 4 and then a ½ inch. So I'm going to use this little square to help to cut out the section that's going to be in here. And that section is going to be basically here. We're going to cut, I'll turn it this way so you can see it. We're going to cut up in there, and I'm going to cut it a 3.5 inch square. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this mark, I'm going to flip it around and put the bottom edge at 3.5 right here. And then I'm going to find the halfway point, which between 3.5 is 1.75 inches. That's the halfway point. So I'm going to put this down on, and I want to zoom you in so you really get a good view of this. I've got my mark, and I'm going to put that at 1.75. Then I'm going to pull the entire thing down so that the edge is on 3.5. And that's going to give us the opening for our hand. And I'll go ahead and draw that on with this marker. All right, and then I'm going to cut that out with my rotary cutter. You could use a pair of scissors as well. Just make sure that both of your layers are properly lined up, edge to edge and this edge. And you don't want to cut too deep into that corner. So I'm going to be very careful as I do that. Now, if you are not a seasoned rotary cutter user, don't do this. You will destroy your fabric, okay? Use a pair of scissors. If you're like me, though, and you love living kind of dangerously, then hey, go for it. You'll have fun. I'm going to get my scissors out and just finish clipping that corner. And then I'll show you on the other side exactly how to do that again on the other end. So let's turn it around and I'll show you again, but I'll use scissors this time. So I get these two edges lined up, right? Line them up. I need to find the center. And again, I know this is 13.5 inches. So the center is going to be 6 3/4. Put a mark at the 6 3/4. If you don't have a little square like this, you could then come along and you know that this needs to be 3.5, which means 1 1/4 on either, 1 3/4 on either side. So I put my mark at 0, go to 1 3/4, put my mark at the 1 3/4 and do the other side. Then I know I need to go up 3.5 inches, put the mark here, mark that across, same thing here, 3.5, and then connect the two. Now is that 3.5 inches wide there? It is, by 3.5 inches wide this way, perfect. Put that mark across and then I'll cut those out with my scissors. I'm gonna make sure the bottom edge stays nice and together. Cut just to the point, right to that point. Same thing here. Beautiful. Oh, and there we go. Now we have both ends of our piece cut out and we're ready to go to the sewing machine. So follow me over there. Now, before I actually put this together, I need to add some fabric that's going to go inside here when the dowels go in, so you don't just see these raw edges, because we have to leave an opening here. And the best thing I want to do, I want to match it. So I'm literally going to take some of this fabric that was on a scrap piece left over, and I'm going to separate this fabric from the back. And I've already started doing it. I've just kind of got my fingers in there and started really pulling. This is where you could use a seam ripper, but to be honest, when you can get a big amount of it and just start pulling, the threads they use for these aren't that good. So it really does come apart. I've just, and then I want to come in and I can just clean up any of the pieces of thread that are left over. You're not going to see very much of this, honestly. It's really just to give us a little bit of a finished edge, and I want it to look nicer. So I'm going to cut 2 pieces of this. Now they have to, once this gets sewn together, we're going to have about a 6-inch opening. So I want to cut this about 5.5 inches, because I'm only going to leave about 1 inch or so open afterwards, but I just want to have enough to fill in there on either side. So I'll cut 2 5.5-inch squares here, and that will be what we need. And like I said, it doesn't have to be quite 5.5 inches. I can make them 5 is probably easier. So I'll do a 5x5 square, just marking on the 5 and the 5. Cut that off. Cut that off. There we go. And now we'll use those in just a moment. The next thing we're going to do, though, is go ahead and sew this together and turn it inside out. So let's go to the sewing machine and we'll do that part. So the first thing I'm going to do is stitch right along the top edges of this piece so that I can then add those other pieces of fabric. And I'll do that on each end. I've gone ahead and threaded my machine with white thread, and I'm going to use almost a 1/2 inch seam allowance here. It's a pretty big seam allowance, but it's on purpose because I want to make sure that none of these pieces and parts come flying out. And this way you don't have to be so accurate when you cut. Some might say more accurately this is a 3/8 inch seam allowance, and maybe that's more accurate. So let me go back around to the other side. Remember, I'm doing it with opposite fabrics facing each other, but you could do it the other direction if you wanted. I just like the idea that this can kind of become reversible. Back into the machine for the other part, other end. All right, then we're going to open this up to the right sides. See how that's now nice and pretty? And I need to put these pieces of fabric on like so. See how it stretches right across there? So I'm going to sew that in there to where it's even. And in fact, I realize now that I need twice as many of these. I need 4 of these altogether. So I'm going to flatten my seam out on the other side, and I'm going to stitch this down. And I'm going to use a little less than a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I'll just use a 1/4 on these, because then it'll get caught in later when it goes in. So let me flatten that out. And then before we sew the rest of it, we're going to pull it around the other side and flatten that in, and that gives us a nicer piece there, because we're not going to stitch all the way to the point there. And let me give you another angle of how this is going to work. So again, I have this edge here that I'm going to stitch on into the opening. I will flatten that out of the seam underneath. And then I place this piece right here, even in between, and I'm going to stitch along that edge. And I'll just do it the opposite direction for you so you can see it. Now I really need to go this way because I need to see how big my seam allowance is. Okay, like that. If you needed to pin this in place, that's perfectly fine. Most of this you're not going to see. In fact, most of this stitching you will not see as we put it together. See what happens when this entire piece lays in, I'm going to flip that now underneath it. And then I'm going to come into my machine and just top stitch that down. So So let me show you, I'm gonna actually put a couple clips in it. Once I find my clips, there they are. Well, I can't get them open. You know, I've got to find another thing to put these in. I keep using the bag that they came in from the place that sold them to me, which is lovely, but in times like this, I can't open them. Ugh. Finally, I finally have access. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold it back, and I'm not trying to fold this the heavy fabric back. I'm just folding that skinny part down, the thin fabric down behind it, to create almost like a nice bound edge. So see how nice that looks? It kind of folds underneath. And I will just come in top stitch right next to it. Take my clip out. And that's going to make a nice finished edge when this folds over for the dowel to go into. Let me show it to you from the other side. So we'll see this one that I've already done. I'm going to flip the fabric to the back. So I will flatten it out here without trying to fold this fabric at all. Flatten it out, right? And then just tuck it underneath. So I'm going to flatten it out and use the edge, this edge of this thicker fabric with the batting, to let it naturally roll behind. See how that works? And then I will just put a couple clips on it. And then that sort of creates that edge that we're going to stitch. It's going to create the edge we're going to stitch. And again, I'm only using a 1/4 inch seam here because later when we put these two together and stitch from the back, it'll capture that edge. All right, I'm going to put this in the machine and stitch right along next to that, right along the edge of that stitch. So I'll have to move this clip down a little bit. And it doesn't matter how good it looks start and finish because those are all going to get covered up. And what this means is that on the back side, now you've got that fabric covering, and then this will get put into the seam when it gets sewn together. Right now what we're going to do is I'm going to do the other end real quick, and then we'll fold this entire thing back in half and continue sewing. All right, now that I have those pieces added, and you'll notice here at the end, I decided to just use the other side of that fabric. I thought it was cute and it would look good. I need to now sew all the way down each side and leaving an opening to turn the entire thing inside out. And then I need to sew here along these. So this is actually the most important part to get accurate, would be these parts here. So I'm going to measure down about as far as I think I need to leave for the dowel to go in which case this is about 1 inch. I'm leaving about 1 inch or so for the dowels to go in. And then I'm going to just put a couple more pins to make sure, clips I should say, not pins, clips, to make sure it is accurately held together. And I've started sort of strategically placing clips, realizing that I need to get to the corner and turn before I have to take a clip out. And then I will also clip down each of the sides. So let me get some clips out here. And I'm making sure it's nice and flat. Now, do me a favor. When you do yours, use a big enough piece of fabric to get all the way to the edge. I should have done these 5.5 inches, like I said, or more, and then just trimmed them off. It's going to be a little ragged. Cut yours bigger here so they go all the way into the edge, and then it's completely enclosed, and you don't have to feel bad like I'm going to feel bad about these. I don't want to take them out right now. When I make another one of these, a third one, because I've already made a prototype and didn't put in these turns, I will go all the way across there, and it's going to be a lot better. So cut those a little wider. And again, I just want to make sure everything lines up. And I'm going to use a bigger seam allowance, like I told you. I'm going to do closer to like 3/8 of an inch or almost 1/2 inch, because I want to make sure all of these layers get caught in. And also, it's a little more forgiving of getting this big piece done exactly correct. And you'll even notice down here, it kind of got off a little on the where it was stitched together. So, you know, I'm giving myself a little leeway. I'm trying to be forgiving of myself. You know, sometimes I get into projects like this and I get really focused on making it exactly perfect. And honestly, I'd rather show you some mistakes, because if I do that, then maybe you learn from my mistakes and make better mistakes yourself. It's one of the mottos we have in our company, which is make new mistakes, is what I tell everybody. So I used to get employees that were so worried they were going to make a mistake, and then it made them slower. And we started deciding that we were going to embrace mistakes, that if somebody made a mistake, we'd all gather around and go, oh my goodness, let's see the new mistake that Tim made. And I would say, hey guys, I made a new mistake. And I would show off a new mistake and they would be excited. And then we would say, don't make this mistake again. If you can help it, always make new ones. So our goal is to always make new mistakes. Okay, I'm gonna come over to the sewing machine and start putting this together. And what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna sew here, right? I'm gonna sew down each edge, leaving a big opening, right? So I'm gonna leave a gigantic opening here. And in fact, to remind myself of that, I might put in, so here's what I'm gonna do. Just to remind myself to leave an opening here, I'm gonna put a whole bunch of clips, right? And maybe you could use you could just designate red clips for this if you thought that was gonna be a more effective way of telling yourself to leave it. This, hopefully I get there and go, why do I have 15 clips there? If I kind of forgot partway through, maybe it would help me to remember. All right, those clips will tell me don't stitch here. But I'll start on this inside part first. So what I'm gonna do is find a spot about an inch down that I wanna start. And I'm gonna use I'm gonna just use a mark on my machine to see that that's where I wanna stop. You'll see it when you go. And then I really backstitch there. In fact, I'm probably going to come off here. Is that what I wanted to do? No, I didn't. I just messed that up. So in fact, I'm going to go in and take that out. Can I take it out? I got to remember, if when I turn this inside out, it should be fine. I'll leave that there. All right, so I'm going to go back to what I was doing. And I'm going to stitch down to about, leaving myself about a ½ inch there for me to turn. And I can check it on my guide at the bottom, or I could mark that on here. And I slowly turn. Now I like to reinforce these turns because you're gonna have to turn this with your, and iron it. And I wanna make sure that's really, really tight. So I've reinforced that a little bit. And again, I come back over here. I need to find a little container to put those things in. Again, I'm back stitching there. We go down to about my inch mark. That's about it. I really want to reinforce this. In fact, I will go ahead and cross it again. Perfect. All right, so I've done that along that bottom edge. And then I'm going to come back and do this 2 sides and the other one just like this. And again, leaving that opening. So let's get that done. If you're worried about having all of this particular fabric going underneath and you have a walking foot, you can use it if you wanted to, you know, be really careful and not get any puckers or tucks or anything. All right, that side's done. Let's go ahead and do the other end and then the other side. All right, almost done. I'm going to start down at this end. Now, why do I have all these clips? Oh yeah, that's right, because I'm going to stop here and leave a space to turn it. Let me go past those clips. All right, let's turn it inside out. All right, so I've got it done, and what I need to do is come in and clip these corners. I'm gonna be real careful though. I'm literally going to cut into that little area there just to give it some ease to turn, but I'm gonna stop at least a 1/16 or more away from the stitching corner. There, I don't wanna cut that out. I'm just trying to give it a little bit of room to turn, which is why I reinforce these little inward facing corners. And now I can reach in through the hole that I created and turn this entire thing inside out. So I'm going to push these points in here and help pull them out. And then this is where you want something to turn it with. Now I like some chopsticks or a point turner like that purple thing that I showed you earlier. And I left a really wide opening because I need to be able to get my whole hand in there. So you want to leave more than just a little bit because it's a very big piece that you're turning inside out. So I'm getting those points turned out. Ooh, look at that. Here's where you would use like your purple thing, or even on this thicker fabric, just a pair of chopsticks is good. So I go in with that chopstick, just kind of point that corner out. Same thing here, I can turn that little point back in because that's where that dowel will eventually go into. See there? That's where the dowel is going to go in. And here's the other side that will get opened up as well. All right, so I've turned it completely inside out. You'll see that. And now I'm gonna just give it a quick press and press these little edges in, and then we'll come back to the sewing machine and we'll top stitch it. So I'm gonna go around and top stitch it, but you have to remember, we're not gonna top stitch across that hole where the dowel is gonna go in. So I'm gonna start below that dowel hole and stitch about 1 inch down. Top stitch this part. I think top stitching just makes it look professional. And then I stitch down each side, and this is going to close up that hole here that we had turned it inside out through. So let me go to this side here. And I'm really just using the edge of the presser foot to give me the width. Same thing on this side. I'm going to skip about 1 inch down so I don't mess up my area that's going to for the dowel rod. And then stitch down the other side. And now what we're able to do is put those dowels in. I'll show you what that looks like. I tuck one side in here through that opening, and then the other side goes on, and it's a little tight, but that's okay. because you want it to really hold on there. You don't want it to have trouble. You don't want it to slide out ever. And there you go. Now we have a dowel on each side, and we'll put the one on the other end, and that's going to be our handles. Let's go ahead and now put the binding around the other piece and put the two pieces together. So this is the piece that we had cut earlier with our binding, and I'm going to stitch the binding back around the edge of this. Now you'll see the binding they've already stitched. They put a very thin, a very tiny stitch right along the edge here, and we're going to try to keep that same thing going as we stitch on this particular binding on. And we're going to turn corners with this, so you have to be really careful how we do that. So I'm going to go in here and look at what the width is. It's almost a 1/2 inch with the measurement on my throat plate. So I'll start down here towards where it's already on, put a few stitches. I'm going to lengthen my stitch length so it looks a little more like the one they used, which is a rather long stitch length. And I'm going to go toward the corner, and I'm going to slowly, as I turn it, I'm sort of turning the fabric, the quilted fabric underneath as well. And it just went off, so I'm going to have to just go back and be a little more careful. Yeah, there we go. Binding is a fun thing to do if you can do it right, and then it's really infuriating if you don't do it right. So it's one of those sewing things that just really annoys the daylights out of you if you don't do it right. And then I'm going to check in the back and make sure it's all being held in there, and it is. It's all connected in there. And again, another corner. Luckily, we only have 3 of these to do. I'm going to try to keep the binding straight. Let me show you. I'll zoom you in. I'm going to try to hold the binding straight and turn this fabric as we go. And what it's done is it's gotten off the binding there by doing that. Let me try it again. And you may actually find that you want to just clip this on first, or pin it might be easier. You could also square off these if you didn't want to do rounded edges, although I kind of like the rounded look because it's soft. Let's see if I got too much fabric in your way. Ah, there we go. And it did that. Fits all the way around, perfect. And we'll just keep sewing down the entire thing. Now these are the long straight stitches, and these are easier to do. I've just sort of pre-fit it underneath here as I go along. And we'll just slowly, now this is where a walking foot would be nice because it'll keep you from having to sort of stretch this binding, which I'm doing a little bit, not on purpose, but it is stretching a little. And I just want to make sure it's getting caught on the other side, which I flip over and do. This is what we're going to have a problem with. We're coming down here toward the end. How are we going to cover these over? So I'm going to go ahead and take the binding out right now and figure out where I want to butt them together or cut them together. And I'm going to just go ahead and overlap them. I'm going to cut this binding down in this area, cut that part off. And then I'm going to measure over a little more, about a 1/2 inch over that. See how I'm going to cut the other one about a 1/2 inch wider. And then I'm going to come butt these 2 ends together. Now, some people do a diagonal cut. I'm not that worried about this, about a diagonal. Frankly, I don't think it's worth the hassle to do it. For me personally, if you want to do it, there are plenty of things on the internet that show you how to do that. You can find some tutorials. So I'm going to butt these together. I remember I cut about a 1/2 inch extra, so I'm going to use a 1/4 inch stitch to do it. And in fact, I do have another video where I did binding. I'm trying to remember which one it was. It's a video that I did binding on. What did I bind that I used that? Oh, on the quilt that I made, which I'm going to put that video out soon. And you could do it. You could use that. So I'm going to, and that'll give you the diagonal cuts. I'm going to start at this half circle. This is what I need to ease in, and I'm going to do that first on this and go down toward where I stitch the 2 together. I'm just going to sort of sew at a fun angle around working this thing around. Keep working it around. Oh, that seemed to work actually. Ease it in. Yes, yes, it worked. And that's done. That whole piece is now finished. So our final step is laying this material out and deciding how we want to get everything in for our pan, right? So the pan goes in the middle of that. This is going to cross over. I will add some Velcro in here to hook it. I'm not going to show that to you. I think you can figure out how to sew Velcro here and here. That's that part done. And then the other part flips around it. And let me get the other. I'm going to put this other dowel in before we get going. Right off into the corner. Again, it's a pretty tight turn here, but we'll get to that. And like I said, I'm very happy with that because I want it to be relatively tight so that it doesn't pop out accidentally while you're carrying your casserole. You know, that'd be a problem. Man down, casserole down. I would hate that. I like casserole too much. All right, so I want to make sure this can be reversible. So I'm going to put this part down here. And I'm going to find the center of it. And using a couple clips, I'm going to mark the center. So this is the center, and I'll put a clip on the center over there. On the center over here. Lay that out. So now I have that piece laid out with my clips for the center. Then I want to sort of center this one using my eyeballs. And I'll look down on either side. Right, so now this is centered perfectly, and that's how it's going to lift up. So I can open these parts, and what this allows me to do is, I could actually, you know what? I just realized something. If I turn this way, it becomes that reversible color. All right, perfect. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to clip these 4 edges here. See what I'm doing? Ooh, so good. Because I have to sew these 2 pieces together. That's fun. 2 more. And then I'm literally just going to sew a square. It's going to be so easy. And in fact, to make it look as good as possible, I will sew this stitch and then this stitch, and then I'll flip it over. And I will sew this stitch and that one at the top. That way, I don't have any extraneous stitching on here that would compete with that. So good. All right, to the sewing machine. Again, I bring this down underneath it. Take that off now. And I'm starting at right where I know the other stitch is going to come out. And I'm just following the line of stitching I've already put in. Okay, that one's done. And I'm going to turn this around and do the other one. And I have clips everywhere. Clips, clips, clips as far as the eye can see. I love these clips, but they go everywhere. Take that off. Now see, there is stitching right here along, and that's what I'm using as my line to start. So now when I flip it over, I can see that line of stitching that went across there, and it's going to stop right here at this one, which I can start sewing again. And I'm just going to follow the line of stitching that's already on that piece of binding. And I'll stop at the line of stitching that I put from the other side. Ooh, flip the whole thing around again. And I am done with that. Oh my goodness, look how good it is. And in fact, great part is we put our piece in. I'm gonna try to do this with you seeing it, watching it this direction. Hook it over, get the Velcro to stick. This is so not the easiest way to do this. I should just move the camera, but I'm lazy. All right, casserole dish goes in that way. The two sides pop up. You'll do it better on your counter, but look, this is your, let me just set it down, make sure I did that right. Ah, yes. With your handles, and there's your casserole dish carrier. Doesn't that look lovely? Isn't it cute? Now here's the other great part. Watch this. I'm going to do, you're gonna be amazed. You're gonna be like, what? Flip it over. Right, same thing, same idea. We flip it over and reverse it, and bam. There is a two-sided, because you can pick which side you want, reversible casserole dish carrier. I am so excited to have brought this to you, even though this is probably the longest video I've made in a very long time, but this was a lot of fun to make, a more in-depth version than that one that we made with the two placemats that I showed you. But this is now store-bought quilt hack number 3 to make a portable casserole dish carrier. If you've enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to the channel. My name is Tim Totten, and until next time, stay crafty. Bye for now. Now I need to make a casserole. Ooh, or brownies.